Hey, good morning, Calvary family, or afternoon, whenever it is that you get this. It's morning for me right now. I'm going to share with you something out of my Bible program. I'm reading currently through, well, one of the sections is through the Torah, which Torah is just a Hebrew for teachings. It's of the first five books of the Bible. And that's what Torah means. It literally means teaching. Some people translate it as law, but it's just so much more than law. There's law, it's one section of it. But I was reading. I'm in the last section of the Torah. I'm kind of moving into the end of my Bible reading plan, and it's in Deuteronomy. In Deuteronomy, Moses is talking to Israel about going into the promises of God, the promised land. And the Torah has most of it, at least I should say a large section of it, was given at Mount Sinai. And now they're in a place, they're away from Mount Sinai, they're overlooking the promised land. And Moses wants to remind them of the teachings and the instructions that God has given them so that it might go well for them in the land. They're going into the promises of God, and so Moses wants them to embrace the promises of God. And so a lot of the laws that we read in the Torah are hard for us to understand because we're trying to understand them in our cultural setting, and it's like from 3,500 years ago. But one of the things that we understand completely is that God was setting up a culture in like 1500 BC that would look vastly, vastly different than all the cultures of the world. It was the culture where all would know, when it was set up, if they were following it, it was a culture where all would know that God had called them, God had directed them, that God was in their midst. Their lives would be completely different from those around them. But Israel never rose up to be that light of the world. I mean, that's the story of the Old Testament, and the Torah shows us shows us their history, and just on how they failed, like one time after another. And the reason is because the Torah is good if one uses it according to its design, and that is to reveal the sinfulness of humankind, right? The need for a savior. 1 Timothy 1, 8 through 11 kind of goes into detail on that. But Deuteronomy not only points this out, but it points to the fact, it points towards the Messiah, that Jesus is coming into the world. The rescue is coming. And so the verse I want to point out today and ponder is from chapter 2, Deuteronomy, verse 3, and it just simply says this: "You have skirted this mountain long enough. Turn northward." Love that verse. Let me just grab a little bit of context for that. Moses was just rehearsing with Israel their failures. Go back and read chapter 1. Israel, it's like the whole point of the Torah, to show the failures, right? Israel had a bad habit of not believing God and not trusting him to do, what he said he was going to do, and to follow what he said. And this led for Israel a lot of needless pain and suffering. And I think we all can relate to that. The application of that's really straightforward. Israel did that for 40 years. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't have that much time. I'd rather hit the fast forward button on that. And we can. That's what chapter 2 is all about. Chapter 2 is the pivot section of this history lesson. And that pivot, I should say, can go anywheres in a person's life. God always brings us to points of pivot from failure. He always does. We'll give back up to verse 1 of chapter 2. It says this: Moses said, "And then we turned and we journeyed to the wilderness of the way of the Red Sea, and the Lord spoke." And so after all the failure, we turned, from the wilderness to the Red Sea, and the Lord spoke to me, and we skirted Mount Seir for many days. And the Lord spoke to me, saying, "You have skirted this mountain long enough. Turn northward." So it's real simple. It's real profound. You've skirted this mountain long enough. God's leading them into the promised land. Great things are ahead for them. And they're going to be difficult to enter into. They're not just going to be easy. But verse 3, "You've skirted this mountain long enough," is a pivot from all their failures. And from there, they're going to enter into the promises of God. So, real simple command. It's been long enough going around this mountain. It's time to start walking in a new way. It's time to stop the old patterns that keep you enslaved and start walking as a people set free. God brought them out of slavery, but now it was time to take the slavery out of them. It's time. It's time. And we have these places in our life as well where God says a very similar thing to us, right? So we're overlooking like our failures, maybe a pattern of failure in our lives. Like once again, we're doing the same thing again. And here we go around the same mountain. And God says, if we're willing to see, God will say to us, sometimes we're not willing to see. We have these self-protective mechanisms that we set up in our lives that keep us from looking at our own failure. It's called pride. But that's what we do. But God will say to us, it's time to stop. You've skirted this mountain long enough. And from that point forward, right from chapter 2 forward, the history starts changing. Israel begins to walk differently. They begin to walk and enter into the promises of God. They don't do it perfectly, but it's not like they did before. And so we're all brought to these places where God's going to ask us, are we done yet? Have we skirted the mountain long enough? And then it's choice time. It's not going to be an easy choice because when you grow up in the wilderness, you get used to the dysfunctions of the wilderness. You know how to walk in one failure and brace yourself to go into the next failure. And you also know how to keep God at a distance. But here he is, and he's here with the invite to walk in a new direction. It's his invite. And what that means is that he's initiating it, right? I mean, he's going to meet us right there, but he's not going to do it for us. He's inviting us in. He's going to give us the power. He's inviting us in, and he'll meet us right there. We've just gone through this whole series on Can I Hear God? We're finishing up this week, this Sunday. And really, all that we've talked about each week we've been talking about walking in a new way, walking as a people who have been set free. And those areas as well as I know my areas where Jesus is asking us, like, are we done yet? Do we need another trip around the mountain? You see, the problem with that is like we can say, tomorrow I'll do it, tomorrow. And we can do that for 40 years, just like Israel. Patterns have this capacity to enslave us for a long time. But the pivot comes and God says to us, you skirted this mountain long enough. Start walking as a child of a king. Of the king, I should say. Do that thing. Do that hard thing. God's there. He's meeting us there. Like we wouldn't know these things. We wouldn't even be aware of these things if he wasn't showing us and wanting to do the work. So let him do the work. Meet him there. Guys, have a beautiful rest of the day. I'll see you on Sunday. And listen, if this stuff, is good for you, if it's something that connects with you, share it with somebody else. Do the thing, thumbs up or like it or whatever it is. Pass it out to others. God bless you guys. I'll see you on Sunday.